I always chalked it up to timing. Not fate, not superstition, just quiet, unexplainable luck. The kind that shows up when a man tailing you from the hospital vanishes the next day. Or when the aggressive patient who grabbed your wrist suddenly gets transferred to another facility without warning. When the resident creep on your bus route disappears after you start taking the same path home. It's the kind of luck that makes your best friend squint at you over stale vending machine coffee and ask, "Are you cursed or protected?" Protected? I laughed, adjusting my scrubs. By what? The ghost of workplace safety. No, Samira said. By someone. Or something. Because the universe doesn't usually clean up messes this neatly. We just finished a 14-hour overnight at Chicago General. No one was particularly coherent. Still, the way she said it stuck with me. Like maybe she wasn't joking. But what was I supposed to think? That someone was following me around like a personal FBI task force? Making creeps disappear? Even my building super had mysteriously stopped threatening to raise my rent. The insurance claim I fought for 6 months suddenly reversed and approved. The suspicious intern who kept accidentally bumping into me was moved to pediatrics the week after I complained. Lucky, right? That's what I told myself until the night I got the first message. You're safe now. He won't follow you again. It came from an unknown number. No greeting. No context. Just that. I stared at the screen in my dark kitchen, sweaty from the walk home, scrubs clinging to my back. My heart kicked once, twice, then settled into a gallop. I deleted it. Prank. Wrong number. Sleep-deprived brain. 3 nights later, another message. Different number. The patient who touched your wrist won't be admitted again. You're welcome. That time, I didn't delete it. Samira's face paled when I showed her. Elara, she whispered. This is stalker-level creepy. Someone's watching you close enough to know what happens inside the hospital. There's no threat, I insisted. They're just stating facts. Helpful facts. She gave me a look I knew too well. You're smarter than this kind. Maybe they're protecting you. Or maybe they're tracking you. Either way, you need to do something. I promised I'd change my routes. Tell security. Maybe crash at her place. But I didn't. Because I wasn't scared. Not yet. And because some part of me didn't want the messages to stop. Over the next week, I noticed things I hadn't before. A man in a gray coat outside my building who never seemed to check his phone. A black car that always left a few seconds after I did. Different drivers, but the same model. The feeling of being followed, not with danger, but with intent. It wasn't haunting. It was present. Quietly constant. And then, one night, he stepped out of the shadows. I was exiting the ER just after 2 a.m., bleary-eyed and half-limping from a code blue that had gone sideways. The street was mostly empty, save for a few rideshare cars and the usual hum of city chaos. That's when I saw him. Tall. Dark suit, expensive but unflashy. Standing still beside a sleek black car like he'd been carved from the night. His eyes found mine before I even looked up. He didn't move. Didn't glance away. Didn't pretend to check a phone or hail a ride. He just watched me. And I watched him back. I knew better than to cross the street. I did it anyway. I stopped 2 feet in front of him, the quiet between us tense and absolute. He didn't move, didn't blink, just held my gaze with a calm that should have rattled me more than it did. The overhead streetlight cast a faint glow over him, outlining broad shoulders beneath the tailored black coat, sharp lines carved into a face that had seen war, or worse. He looked like a man who had buried secrets in concrete, not smiled at strangers in hospital parking lots. And still, he wasn't trying to scare me, he was just waiting. You've been watching me, I said flatly, needing to hear it out loud. His expression didn't shift, not even a flicker of guilt or denial. Yes, he answered simply, like we were discussing the weather. I crossed my arms, fighting the instinct to step back, because whatever he wasn't unstable, he was too controlled for that. And that scared me more than wild eyes ever could. I want you to leave me alone. It came out steadier than I felt, but I saw it land. His jaw flexed once, like he wanted to argue, but had already made peace with my reaction. I will, he said, if that's what you truly want. The way he said it, like he already knew it wasn't. But before you decide, "There's something you should know." I didn't speak. He took it as permission to continue. "My name is Nikolai Sokolov." He said it like it meant something, like I should already know. I didn't, not yet, but the name settled in my bones like cold steel. "You've been safe for 2 years because of me." My mouth dried, the words catching before they formed. "Excuse me," I managed. "You've, what?" "Protected you," he said, stepping slightly to the side so I could see the black car behind him. "Not from afar. Intentionally. Precisely. Every threat, every situation you avoided, it wasn't luck, Elara." Hearing my name in his voice cracked something open. "How do you know my name?" I asked, and I hated how quiet it came out. "I know a lot about you," he replied, not cruelly, not smugly, just fact. "Your name. Your shift schedule. Your favorite sandwich from the vending machine on 3B. I took a step back then, instinct overriding logic. "This is insane." "Is it?" he asked softly, tilting his head. "Because insanity is letting danger come for someone like you without doing anything." My stomach twisted, but I didn't move again. 2 years ago," he said, "you saved someone who mattered to me." That gave me pause. "What?" "My sister," he said, finally looking away for a moment. "Anna. She came into the ER with a gunshot wound. You stayed past your shift, held her hand through surgery prep. She told me later, the blonde nurse didn't let go." I remembered now. A scared teenager, shaking under the fluorescent lights, trying to be brave. "She was sweet," I said, unsure why I was admitting anything. "She kept apologizing like it was her fault she got shot." Nikolai nodded once. "That's who she is. And who you are is someone who saw her as more than a case file." "So what?" I said, grasping for something solid. "You've been stalking me for 2 years because I did my job?" He didn't flinch. "I don't expect you to understand," he said. "But in my world, debts are paid in full. You kept Anna breathing. I've kept you safe." A horn honked in the distance, jarring the moment like a needle scratching vinyl. I took another step back. "That's not protection. That's obsession." He nodded again, slow this time. "Sometimes they look the same. But I've never touched you. Never approached you. Until now." "Why no?" I asked, my voice smaller than I liked. "Because you noticed," he said simply. "And I'd rather you hear the truth than spiral with half of it." I swallowed hard. "You expect me to be grateful?" "No," he said, and for the first time, I heard something soft under the calm, something almost human. "I expect you to be angry. Confused. Maybe afraid. But not ungrateful." I didn't know what to say to that. He stepped toward the car, opening the rear passenger door. "Let me give you a ride home," he offered. I stared at the car like it might swallow me whole. "No, suit yourself," he said. "But Vincent will still follow you, just in case." "I don't need your men following me." "Yes," he said, "you do. You just don't like admitting it." "Is that what this is?" I shot back. "You watching me and calling it a favor?" "No," he replied. "It's a promise." I turned and walked away without another word, refusing to give him the satisfaction of looking back. My hands were trembling by the time I reached the corner. I didn't take the train. I called a rideshare instead, checking the mirror 3 times during the ride. He didn't follow. But I felt his presence anyway, like smoke under my skin. My building was quiet when I reached it, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak in the stairwell. I got inside, locked every lock, and leaned against the door with a shaky breath. My phone buzzed the moment I exhaled. "Don't be afraid. I'd never hurt you." There was no name attached. Just a number I didn't recognize. But I knew who it was. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. Instead, I stood there in the dark, rereading it 3 times, each one hitting different. Because the truth was, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't entirely sure I wanted him to stop. For the next few days, I saw everything. Men in different jackets, but the same posture lingered near my building's entrance. Delivery drivers who never made a delivery. Cars parked too long across the street with engines running. One guy even held a book upside down outside my window for 30 minutes. It wasn't paranoia if it was true, right? At work, the pattern only deepened. The nurse who accidentally revealed my break schedule to a patient was transferred within 48 hours. My claim for protective gear reimbursement, denied twice before, was suddenly processed and paid in full. Even the guy who made too many comments about my scrubs being tight in the right places stopped showing up for shifts entirely. It was like my life had become self-cleaning, one problem disappearing after another. I started tracking them. Not just the faces, but the license plates. The timing. The uncanny efficiency of it all. There were at least 5 men on rotation now, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but I did. They weren't watching me, they were watching for me. And it terrified me how safe that made me feel. When I told Samira, she nearly dropped her coffee. "Elara, this is textbook surveillance," she said, pulling me into the stairwell like it was a spy movie. "You don't know who this man is, and you're letting him sit outside your building like it's normal?" "I'm not letting him do anything," I said. "He's doing it whether I agree or not." Samira didn't find that reassuring. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked. "That's not protection. That's control. And you need to report it." I didn't answer. Because she was right and she wasn't. I should have been scared. But all I felt was an unsettling calm. Because if the world really was full of monsters, wasn't it better to have one on my side? Still, I needed answers. And if Nikolai Sokolov wanted to play guardian angel, then he could at least do it to my face. So, I texted the same unknown number that had sent me the message the night we met. "We need to talk. Today. My terms." The response came less than 60 seconds later. Café Levon, 1 block from the hospital. "I'll be at the back table. Come alone." I found him exactly where he said he'd be. Sitting like he owned the air around him, one hand on a cup of black coffee, the other resting, relaxed, but ready, on the table. He looked like every warning poster ever made, tailored, brooding, dangerous. And completely at ease. He didn't stand when I approached, just looked up and nodded. "I'm surprised you came," he said. "I'm surprised you sent directions instead of a driver," I replied. "I'm trying to respect your terms." I pulled out the chair across from him, ignoring how steady his eyes stayed on me. "Start talking." Nikolai took a sip of coffee and nodded once, like he'd expected this moment. "I know what you think this is," he began. "Some obsession. Some fantasy built around debt or gratitude. But it's not." I folded my arms, waiting. "I don't watch people," he said. "I watch threats. You've been watching me. To eliminate what comes near you," he corrected. "That's not protection, that's invasion." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you feel invaded, Elara?" I hated that I didn't answer. "I'm not a lunatic in love," he continued. "I'm a man who understands risk and recognizes value. You saved someone I love when no one else did. You stayed when others walked away. You made Anna feel like a person, not a casualty." My breath caught at the name. Anna. The girl with blood on her sweater and tears in her eyes. "I remember her," I said softly. "She kept asking if her brother would be mad about the car." Nikolai's jaw tensed, just briefly. "She thought I'd kill her for crashing it. All I cared about was that she was alive." I could feel the weight behind his voice now, the burden of a man who's had to protect others in ways most people never imagine. "And after that night," he said, "I decided I'd do the same for you. Quietly. Thoroughly. Permanently." "That's not your choice to make," I whispered. "It wasn't a choice," he said. "It was instinct. I didn't ask for this. And Anna didn't ask to be saved." He paused. "But you stayed anyway." Silence pulled between us. Outside, the city moved on, taxis honking, people laughing, unaware that 2 strangers inside a quiet cafe were rewriting the rules of what connection looked like. I studied him then. Not just his face, but his composure. His certainty. His calm. And beneath it, something else, a deep, unflinching loyalty that both unnerved and disarmed me. "I still don't understand why me," I said, softer now. "There are 1,000,000 nurses in Chicago. 100 hospitals. Why go this far?" Nikolai leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Because in a world that's constantly burning," he said, "you didn't run from the fire. You walked into it, held someone's hand, and made her feel safe." "That was my job," I said. "That was your choice," he corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at me then, like he was seeing something I didn't even see in myself. "And I don't wait for permission to protect what's mine." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words sank in with slow finality, not possessive, but deliberate. Not demanding, just certain. Like this was already written. I stood, pushing the chair back gently. Is Anna okay now? I asked, not knowing why I needed to. She's in college, he said. Healthy. Safe. He paused. Because of you. I nodded once, turning to leave. Then, just before I stepped away, I looked over my shoulder. I didn't know I belonged to anyone, I whispered. And I walked out, heart pounding harder than it had in days. If someone had been protecting you for years, without your knowledge, would you feel safe or betrayed? Would you accept their protection or walk away? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. I didn't sleep the night after the cafe. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nikolai sitting there, calm and immovable, telling me he didn't need permission to protect what was his. His words vibrated in my skull like a struck bell, echoing until morning blurred into a gray haze. I kept replaying the conversation, analyzing each piece, trying to figure out whether it was more comforting or horrifying. And somehow, it was both. By the time my shift ended the next evening, exhaustion made my arms heavy, but adrenaline kept my steps sharp. I found him waiting outside the hospital again, leaning against that same black car like a wolf guarding territory. The sight should have sent me the other way, but instead, I walked directly to him, my heartbeat strangely steady. If he wanted truth and transparency, then he could start by hearing what I had to say. He straightened slightly when he saw me, but didn't move closer. We need to talk, I said, folding my arms. His eyes flicked up in acknowledgement, the faintest curve of tension forming at the edge of his mouth. Of course, he murmured, sounding almost relieved. I hated that part of me responded to that. Not here, I added. Walk with me. We moved down the quieter side of the block, my breath visible in the cool night air. Nikolai didn't speak at first, giving me the silence I needed, letting me take the lead. It was strange, knowing he could command entire rooms with a word yet let me control the pace here. But that control made what I had to say easier to voice. I need boundaries, I finally said. Nikolai's gaze shifted to me, patient but sharp. Tell me, he said simply. No more surveillance without my consent, I began, willing the words not to shake. No more men outside my apartment, no more tailing me in the car, no more. Whatever this is behind my back. His expression didn't change, but something tightened in the air. And no interfering in my life unless I ask you to, I continued, pushing the last sentence out like a dare. Silence stretched between us like a drawn wire. Nikolai exhaled, slow and controlled, like he was processing whether I was asking for something possible or something impossible. Elara, he said quietly, you don't survive in my world by asking permission to protect the innocent. The words weren't condescending, they were resigned truth. I'm not innocent, I shot back. Not anymore. Not with what I know. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that unreadable calm. You're more innocent than you think. The way he said it made my chest tighten, because he wasn't talking about naivete, he was talking about purity in a world that had none. I held a stare. Then protect me with honesty, I said. Not secrets. A muscle flickered in his jaw, a rare show of emotion. Elara, my world is not built on honesty. Then build a different part of it for me. He looked away for a moment, as if weighing the danger of agreeing. Then he nodded once, a deliberate movement. I can inform you before I take action, he said. As much as circumstances allow. And the surveillance? I pressed. Reduced, he answered. Transparent. But not gone. I wanted to argue. But even as fire rose in my throat, another part of me, the part that remembered dark parking lots and too quiet hallways, hesitated. Because as twisted as it was, I felt safer when I knew he was near. And that was something I couldn't deny. Fine, I said finally. A truce. But a real one. He nodded again, slower this time. A truce, he echoed. The word hung between us, fragile but binding. For the first time, I saw something like vulnerability flicker in his eyes, an openness he didn't show the world. And I hated how deeply that pulled at me. We walked a little farther, no longer fighting, just existing in the same space with a new kind of tension. His presence soothed and unsettled me at the same time, grounding me even when part of me wanted to run. It was the strangest form of gravity, not pulling me toward him, but making it impossible to drift away. My steps slowed as we reached the corner where our paths would split. "Thank you," I murmured, surprising even myself. "For what?" he asked. "For listening," I said. "For meeting me halfway." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You deserve more than halfway," he replied, "but it's all I can safely give." The honesty in that made my breath catch again. I turned to go, but he spoke before I got far. "Elara." I looked back, and he held my gaze with the weight of someone who saw more than he should. "If something feels wrong," he said softly, "tell me first. Not the hospital staff. Not your friend. Me." It wasn't a request, it was a vow. "I'll think about it," I said, because agreeing would have felt like surrendering. But he seemed to hear something else in my tone, because the edge of his expression softened. I left him there, in the pools of streetlight and shadow, his figure a contradiction of menace and protection. The walk home felt strangely lighter, as if some invisible tension had uncoiled inside me. But that calm wouldn't last, because for the first time in days, the figure standing across from my apartment wasn't familiar. No rhythm to his stance, no coordinated presence like Nikolai's men. This one watched differently, calculating, not guarding. When I approached, he turned away too quickly, disappearing into the alley. And dread prickled the back of my neck. I closed the curtains that night, double-checked every lock, and told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to believe the paranoia came from exhaustion, from the emotional whiplash of confronting a man who lived in shadows. But deep down, I knew better. I was being watched again, just not by the man who claimed me. Not by the man I'd just set boundaries with. The next morning at work, reality shattered whatever rationalizations I had left. Nikolai's second-in-command stood in the hallway outside the ER, his stance rigid and tense. His presence alone meant something was wrong. He didn't try to stop me, but his eyes tracked me with the sharpness of prepared danger. And when my phone buzzed seconds later, my stomach dropped. "We need to talk." Immediately. The text wasn't from Nikolai. It was from the same unknown number he always used, but the tone was different. Urgent. Cold. I stepped outside and hit call. He answered on the first ring. "Elara," he said, voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "What's going on?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough to turn my blood to ice. "A rival syndicate asked about you." My hand tightened around the phone. "Asked how?" "By name," he said. "By shift schedule. By apartment location." Fear crawled up my spine in slow, electric threads. "You said you reduced surveillance," he continued. "But it appears others didn't." A single beat of silence. "So understand something," he said, voice dropping into a tone that left no air in the room. "This is no longer just about my world intersecting with yours. This is about someone else entering it. And I won't allow that." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, pulse racing, every instinct screaming that something had shifted. That our truce had been shattered by something neither of us saw coming. That the game wasn't just mine and Nikolai's anymore. Something darker had stepped onto the board. And I wasn't sure whose rules we were playing by now. The next morning, a different man was standing near the hospital entrance. Not the usual silent observer with military posture and unmarked clothing. This one was lean, a little too well-groomed, his suit sharp but not expensive enough to be invisible. He smiled at passing nurses, nodded at a security guard, even offered to hold the door open for a patient in a wheelchair. But when I stepped outside, his eyes locked on me with the kind of curiosity that felt studied, not casual. I didn't acknowledge him, but I clocked everything. The subtle shift of his weight as I walked by. The way he angled his head to follow my path without turning it. The smile he wore, soft, deferential, forgettable. The kind of smile that hides teeth underneath. Back inside, I told myself it was coincidence. Hospitals drew all kinds, reps, family members, board interns with too much time and too little supervision. But the next day, he was there again. Same spot. Same posture. Same smile. That evening, as we exited our shift together, Samira leaned in close. "Do you know that guy?" she asked. I played dumb. "Who?" "The one who keeps showing up near the ER parking lot." Soft voice. Beige coat. "Looks like a youth pastor with secrets." My stomach dropped, but I tried to keep my face still. I've seen him around, I said. Samira frowned. Well, he's been asking about you. My pulse kicked. What do you mean? He asked the front desk what department you worked in. Twice. That stopped me cold. And? They didn't tell him, obviously. But he was persistent. Samira glanced back toward the exit doors. Elle, are you sure everything's okay? I nodded too quickly. Yeah, just tired. It was the most honest lie I could manage. Because I wasn't okay. Not anymore. That night, I stared at my apartment window longer than usual. No shadows across the street. No black car. No familiar presence. Just silence, the kind that feels too quiet to be safe. I kept checking the peephole, the fire escape, the alley below. And when I finally fell asleep, it wasn't deep, just the restless drift of a woman expecting to wake up startled. At exactly 2:04 a.m., the buzzer rang. I jolted upright, heart punching through my ribs. The second buzz came 2 seconds later. Then silence. I moved to the window, careful to keep the lights off. And there he was. The beige coat man stood outside my building, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed directly at my window. His face was unreadable, but his presence was too calculated to be innocent. He didn't move. He didn't knock again. He just waited. Like he knew I was watching. I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling through the fog of adrenaline. I didn't text Nikolai. I called him. He picked up before the second ring. Elara. He's here, I whispered. The man from the hospital. There was no pause, no curse. Just 2 clipped words, don't move. I didn't breathe. The minutes dragged until I heard a car engine outside roar louder than it should at this hour. A familiar black vehicle screeched to a stop. And then everything snapped into motion. Nikolai stepped out like a storm in human form. Dark coat, darker eyes, moving with lethal purpose. He said nothing as he crossed the street, closing the space between him and the man in beige. The stranger straightened, trying for calm. But when Nikolai stopped 3 inches from him, the air thickened like fog. You've made a mistake, Nikolai said quietly. The man tried to smile. I don't know what you think this is, Nikolai leaned in, voice low enough that I had to strain to hear it through the glass. You just walked into a war. The man flinched, just barely. I watched as Nikolai stepped aside and gestured. Another man, broader, less patient-looking, appeared from the car and took the stranger by the arm. No fight. No yelling. Just quiet removal, the kind that screams power more than noise ever could. In seconds, the street was empty again. When I opened the door minutes later, Nikolai was already walking up the stairs. I didn't wait for him to knock. I opened it and stepped back. He entered without speaking, closing the door behind him with eerie calm. Then he looked at me. He asked about your building manager. Your floor. If anyone ever came by late. His voice was cold, razor sharp. He's been mapping your routines. My skin crawled. Who is he? Someone who won't be seen near you again. I sank onto the arm of my couch, fingers trembling. Nikolai stood across from me, jaw tight, fury radiating from him in waves he barely restrained. Why didn't you call me sooner? I didn't think it was that serious, I admitted. He was polite. Politeness is a mask, Nikolai said. So is softness. They're both weapons in the wrong hands. I looked up at him, suddenly cold. What are you going to do to him? He didn't answer. Which, somehow, was worse than anything he could have said. I told you I needed boundaries, I said quietly. Transparency. He exhaled, slower this time. And I honored that, he said. Until tonight. You think that makes it okay? No, he said. It makes it necessary. I couldn't argue with that, not after seeing that man's face at 2 a.m., not after feeling like prey in my own home. Still, I hated the part of me that felt safer now. Like the war he'd mentioned had been real all along. And I just hadn't seen it until the moment it knocked on my door. Nikolai sat across from me, watching me as if trying to read a conclusion I hadn't written yet. I won't lie to you, he said. There will be more. More of him. More of what you are to me, he corrected, which means more people who will want to use that. I didn't answer. Because the truth was beginning to settle like dust in my lungs, this wasn't about surveillance anymore. This was about leverage. I'd become the thing you target to make a man like Nikolai bleed. And I wasn't sure what scared me more, that fact, or how much he was willing to bleed. If someone tried to approach you the way the stranger did Elara, softly, politely, but persistently, would you have trusted your instincts or waited too long? Tell us in the comments, would you have opened the door or made the call? The hospital garage was quiet, too quiet. My shoes clicked against the concrete floor, echoing in the emptiness, like something waiting to be broken. I wrapped my coat tighter around me, juggling my keys and phone, trying to shake the exhaustion from my bones. Third night shift in a row, and my brain was running on muscle memory. Still, something about the silence pulled at me. When I reached my car, I noticed it. The back door wasn't fully closed. A sliver of darkness cracked open like a warning. I hesitated, heart picking up speed. And that's when I felt the prick on my neck. I spun around, or tried to, but my knees buckled before I could make sense of the shadows. A face loomed in the blur, unfamiliar, unmoved. "You'll be fine," a voice muttered, almost bored. Then the world folded in on itself and everything went black. No screams. No chance to fight. Just silence. When I came to, the lights were too bright. A humming above me, harsh and clinical, filled my ears. My wrists ached, bound, not tightly, but enough. I blinked until the ceiling resolved into rust-streaked metal panels. A warehouse. Of course it was a warehouse. I was lying on a narrow cot, nothing but steel and stained fabric beneath me. My coat was gone. My shoes too. But I was dressed. Unharmed. Which only made the tension worse. Because this wasn't violence, this was leverage. A man stepped into view, clean-shaven, expensive-looking, the kind of calm that didn't match the setting. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the cot like we were about to have a polite conversation. "Elara Finch," he said, almost pleasantly. "Doctor. R. Lives alone. Loved by the press and protected by the devil." I stared at him, refusing to give him what he wanted: fear, confusion, anything. His smile sharpened. "You're his weakness," he said softly. The words landed like a slap. "Nikolai Sokolov," he continued. "Hard to touch. Until now." He leaned in just enough for me to smell the cold scent of mint and steel on his breath. "We're going to make him bleed." Meanwhile, across the city, Nikolai Sokolov shattered a glass against the floor. Blood ran down his fingers from where it had cut, but he didn't flinch. "Where?" he demanded. Vincent, his second, his shadow, had the call log open. "Hospital garage," Vincent said. "We've got the footage. 3 men. Gray van. South exit." She was unconscious before she hit the ground. Nikolai was already moving. Orders flew from his mouth like bullets, sharp, precise, deadly. "Contact Lyra. Pull the satellite grid. Get eyes on every warehouse between here and the 87 corridor." He didn't sit, didn't breathe normally. He was hunting. His voice dropped to a growl. "They took her to use against me," he said. "Which means they don't intend to keep her long." Vincent nodded. "What's the play?" Nikolai's eyes were like knives. "We end this before she feels fear." Back in the warehouse, I was moved to a chair, still bound, but now upright. My feet touched the cold floor. I rolled my wrists slowly, testing the ties. They'd underestimated me. That, or they thought I didn't matter enough to secure tightly. Which was their second mistake. The first was taking me at all. "They'll come for you," the man said. "Not just Nikolai. His people. His wrath. You're just a message, you know." I tilted my head. "And what message is that? We're bad at kidnapping." His smile cracked. "I hope he's as smart as they say. Or you won't like how this ends." He stood and nodded to one of the others, a twitchy man with a shaved head and unclean fingernails. They whispered in the corner, thinking I wouldn't notice the panic tightening their movements. But I did. And I also noticed the sound outside shifting. Low engines. Too synchronized. Too many. A convoy. And then, as if the air itself had changed weight, I felt him. Nikolai was here. The first shot split the silence like lightning. Then another. And another. Screams. Footsteps. The chaos of men not prepared for war. I ducked instinctively, chair toppling with me, the metal clanging against the floor. Boots pounded outside the room. My heart thundered, every beat calling his name, not out of romance, but out of survival. Because if anyone could end this, it was him. If anyone could turn a warehouse into a battlefield, it was Nikolai Sokolov. And he was coming for me. No doubt. No hesitation. Just fury. Outside, I heard a body hit the wall. Something slammed hard. Someone begged. Then footsteps, calm, deliberate, getting closer. I didn't know whether to cry or brace for more. But when the door burst open, it was Nikolai's silhouette framed in smoke and fury. He didn't speak. He crossed the room in 3 steps, knife drawn, slicing my restraints in a single motion. Then his hands were on my face, checking for bruises, cuts, terror. I blinked up at him, breath caught between shock and relief. "I'm okay," I whispered. "I'm okay." His jaw clenched, eyes scanning every inch of me before pulling me into his arms. "I will burn this building to the ground," he said into my hair. "Later," I murmured. "Let's get out first." He gave a short, grim nod, then turned toward the hallway, gun already raised. Behind us, the warehouse roared with chaos. His men moved like shadows, silent, deadly exact. I didn't see how many, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they had planned for Nikolai, they had gravely underestimated the cost of touching me. Nikolai moved through the compound like death in a tailored coat. Every corner turned was a calculation. Every shot fired a message. His men didn't ask questions, they executed orders with brutal precision. The air inside the warehouse was thick with smoke, blood, and the smell of fear. And all of it pulsed with one singular motive: find Elara and end anyone who tried to keep her from him. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. But his silence was more terrifying than chaos. Every man who raised a weapon against him went down fast, cold, unceremonious. By the time he reached the center corridor, half the operation was already dismantled. The door she was behind wasn't guarded anymore. They'd either fled or fallen. He stepped inside and saw her, hunched on the floor beside the cot, hands unbound, eyes wide. Her face, pale, shaken, was the only thing that made his mask slip. Not the gunfire. Not the blood. Just her, alive and too quiet. "Elara," he breathed. She didn't speak, just looked at him like she wasn't sure if he was real or part of the nightmare. Then she stood slowly, carefully, and stepped into his arms. No drama, no words. Just 2 people collapsing into the only thing they trusted, each other. His arms wrapped around her, tight but trembling. "You're okay," he whispered over and over like a prayer. I didn't know if she shook her head against his chest. They didn't touch me. Just watched. His jaw flexed so hard, she felt it under her cheek. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She didn't ask what he meant. Because whatever those men had done, or tried to do, they were already ghosts. Nikolai Sokolov didn't leave threats breathing. He led her out through the back, shielding her as they passed bodies and the sound of restraint snaps and weapons clattering to the floor. She kept her eyes down, but the noises etched themselves into her memory: the groan of pain, the sharp commands, the finality of silence. Outside, the night air hit her like a slap. Vincent was waiting beside a car, blood on his sleeve, but eyes calm. "She's clear," Nikolai said. "Get us out." The ride to the penthouse was quiet. Nikolai sat beside her, not touching, but never more than 6 inches away. She stared out the window, hands pressed between her knees, knuckles white. Every few seconds, she'd glance sideways, not out of fear, but to make sure he was still there. She didn't say it aloud, but the thought pulsed steady in her mind. He came. Upstairs, the silence turned heavy. Nikolai unlocked the door like he always did, 2 quick turns, then the magnetic panel near the frame. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like walking into someone else's war bunker. He closed the door, then turned to face her. "No one will ever touch you again," he said, voice like gravel wrapped in steel. His coat was still splattered with blood at the hem, and yet he stood like a man who hadn't been hit. But something in his eyes had cracked. This wasn't the composed, untouchable man she'd confronted weeks ago. This was someone raw, scorched, hollowed out by what could have been. "I should have seen it coming," he said. "I underestimated how bold they'd get, how fast they'd act." She opened her mouth, but he cut her off gently. "I failed you, Elara." "No," she whispered. "You came. He shook his head, jaw tight. They should have never gotten that close. You got me out, she said, stepping forward. You didn't even know where I was, and you still found me. That doesn't make it right, he said. It just makes it bearable. The weight of his guilt filled the room like smoke. And despite everything, the blood, the trauma, the fear still clinging to her skin, she wanted to make it stop. She touched his face gently, fingers tracing the scar above his brow. You didn't fail me, she said again. You're the only one who's ever shown up. His hands rose to cover hers, rough palms cradling her fingers like they were breakable. I will never let this happen again, he said. Ever. Her breath hitched, but she nodded. Because she believed him, even if the cost terrified her. He stepped back, looking like he wanted to destroy something just to feel control again. Go shower, he said softly. I'll make something hot. You need normal. She didn't argue. Because in this world, food and silence were his apology. And survival was their shared language. In the bathroom, steam curled around her as she let the water erase the grime of fear. But it couldn't wash away the questions. When she closed her eyes, she saw the warehouse. When she blinked them open, she saw his face not when he found her, but when he looked like he'd lost her. And that stayed with her more than anything else. By the time she returned, wrapped in one of his clean shirts, the apartment was dim, the kitchen glowing with warm light. Nikolai was at the stove, sleeves rolled, hands steady. He glanced up, relief flickering across his expression like a candle catching wind. Sit, he said. You need to eat. She did. Not because she was hungry, but because she needed to feel human again. They ate in silence, the kind that settles between people who've seen something neither wants to say out loud. Afterward, he poured her tea, added just enough honey, because he remembered, always remembered, and sat across from her. I need to ask, she said quietly. His jaw tensed again. What? Is this what your world really looks like? He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, it's what I keep from you. Her heart panged not from fear, but from the realization that he'd carried this weight for years without ever dropping it near her feet. And I can't promise it won't happen again, he continued. But I can promise I'll always come for you. She swallowed, throat tight. I don't know if I belong in it, she whispered. His gaze met hers, still storm-dark. I don't want you in it, he said. I want you beside me. Safe. Separate. Untouched by all of this. But I'm not, she replied. I've been pulled in. By you. By them. By all of it. She stood slowly, walking toward the window, watching the lights of the city blink back indifferently. Tell me the truth, she said, voice barely above a breath. If this is what your world looks like, do I belong in it? The first morning back in Nikolai's apartment was quiet. Not the hollow quiet of fear, but the careful hush of recovery. He didn't hover. He didn't smother. But every time I turned my head, he was nearby, just out of reach, but always there. His version of space was never absence. It was presence without pressure. I spent most of the day in one of his oversized shirts, curled on the couch, blanket tucked around me. He'd left tea on the table, warm, steeped with honey and a slice of lemon, just the way I liked it. The TV played something low and forgettable, a crime show, ironically, but my eyes weren't on the screen. They kept drifting to the window, to the skyline beyond it, to the city I'd always moved through alone. It didn't feel that way anymore. My mind played cruel games, replaying the kidnapping, the caught, the ropes. But every time it got dark, it would land on Nikolai bursting through that door. On his face. On the kind of fear that doesn't come from losing control, but from almost losing me. And that changed things. I used to think love was quiet. Safe. Tame. Predictable. But Nikolai didn't fit any of those boxes. He was fire where I expected warmth. Gravity where I expected freedom. And somehow, I never felt more grounded than I did when his world wrapped around mine. He didn't speak much the first 2 days. He moved through the apartment like a shadow with purpose, cooking, taking calls in hushed tones, checking the perimeter cameras himself. Every few hours, he'd leave a fresh drink by my side, water, tea, broth, and disappear again. He never asked how I was feeling. But every action screamed that he already knew. By the third night, the silence between us had thickened. Not in discomfort, but in weight. There were things we weren't saying, things we were both afraid to name. I sat on the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror, unsure of who I was anymore. Not just the survivor, but the woman who still wanted the man who lived behind locked doors and bulletproof glass. Could I love a man who ordered hits and still made me breakfast? Could I build something real with someone who'd once called my life a tactical liability? I didn't know, but I knew I wanted to try. Because no one had ever made me feel safer in my skin than the man who'd burned down a warehouse to get me back. Around midnight, I stepped out onto the rooftop. It was colder than I expected, wind biting at my sleeves, the sky velvet black and sharp with stars. Nikolai was standing near the edge, coat undone, tie loosened. One hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass he hadn't touched. He didn't turn when I came up. He didn't have to. "You shouldn't be up here in the cold," he said, voice low. "I've been through worse," I replied, stepping beside him. He finally looked at me, eyes scanning my face like he was still checking for wounds. "You should be resting. You should stop looking at me like I'm breakable." His gaze dropped. Just for a second. Then he nodded once, barely. "I don't know how to look at you any other way," he said. "Not after that." I looked out over the city, watching the lights flicker like the world hadn't paused for what we went through. "It's not your fault. I made you a target," he said. "The moment I claimed you, even in silence, and the moment you claimed me," I replied, "I stopped being alone." He glanced at me again, sharper this time. "Elara, no," I said. "Let me finish. I've been followed, harassed, cornered, groped on public trains, ignored when I reported it. And all my life, I've had to handle it. Smile. Shrink. Swallow it whole." I turned to him fully now. "You were the first person who did something before it happened. Who saw the threat and didn't wait to see if it would become real." He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence was carved from guilt. Mine was shaped from something else entirely. Gratitude. Fear. Something dangerously close to love. "I fought for everything," I whispered. "My place in med school. My right to be heard in male-dominated rooms. My right to feel safe walking home at night." He took a step closer, hand still clenched around the untouched glass. "And then you showed up," I said. And suddenly, I wasn't fighting alone. His breath hitched. I saw it, that flicker of emotion he always kept buried under strategy and calculation. "Elara," he said again, softer. "I'm not the man you're supposed to love." "I'm not here for supposed to," I said. "I'm here because, somehow, being in your crosshairs still feels safer than being in anyone else's blind spot." He stared at me like I'd just handed him a reason to breathe. Like I'd cracked open the walls he'd built so tightly around himself, not with fire, but with truth. He set the glass down, step by slow step closing the space between us. "You mean that?" he asked, voice no longer dangerous, just vulnerable. "I mean it," I said. "All of it." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers hesitated there, like they were asking permission. I didn't move away. Instead, I leaned in, not desperate, not rushed. Just ready. And when he kissed me, it wasn't fire. It was home. There was no music, no swelling strings, no perfect lighting. Just the soft exhale of breath against lips, the slow pull of two people who had fought too long to finally land here. He kissed like a man who'd never thought he'd be allowed to, and I kissed like a woman who had never felt protected enough to try. We broke apart only when the wind picked up again. "I've never had this before," he said. "This? Something I wanted more than control." I smiled, barely. "Good. Because I don't want control. I want you." Would you rather live protected in someone's crosshairs or unseen in someone else's blind spot? Let us know in the comments. Would you have kissed him on that rooftop? Loving Nikolai wasn't a whirlwind. It wasn't a crash or a storm or some fairy tale conflagration that burned everything down in one glorious blaze. It was slower, quieter, like a fire that never flickered out, just kept glowing steady no matter how much the world tried to snuff it out. He was still Nikolai, guarded, calculating, lethal when he needed to be. But there were softer moments now. The way his hand lingered on my back when he passed behind me in the kitchen. The way he waited for me to fall asleep before quietly checking every lock in the apartment. And the way he always brewed my tea before I even asked. He didn't say I love you, not in words. But he said it in the way he touched me like I was precious, not breakable. In the way he made time for things that weren't tactical. Like sitting with me during a thunderstorm, just because I told him I used to be scared of the dark as a kid. Or the way he never brought up the warehouse again, not once, because he knew I wasn't ready to revisit that night. I started sleeping at his place more. At first, it was practical security, recovery, convenience. But it became habit, then comfort, then something that felt too natural to question. My toothbrush migrated to his bathroom, followed by my favorite sweater. A drawer opened in his closet, and it didn't close again. He didn't comment when my phone charger became a permanent fixture on his nightstand. Or when I started leaving books face down on his coffee table like I lived there. He just started ordering groceries with my preferences in mind, stocking oat milk without asking, and replacing my vitamins when I ran low. It was quiet love, the kind that builds one small gesture at a time. And it crept up on both of us before we could name it. One afternoon, he asked if I wanted to see Anna again. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was nervous. Would she even remember me? Would she resent me for what I now represented, the line that tied her brother to vulnerability? But I nodded, and he made the call. We met at a quiet cafe near the edge of the river, where the wind smelled like coffee and distant rain. Anna was taller now, her hair darker, but her eyes were still familiar, cautious, and kind. She smiled the second she saw me, and for a moment, it was like nothing had changed. "I remember your hands," she said. "You held mine like I was already safe, even when I wasn't." The lump in my throat caught me by surprise. "I didn't know who you were," I said quietly. She shrugged. "Didn't matter. You stayed." I glanced at Nikolai, who was watching us both from a respectful distance, pretending not to listen but taking in every word. And in that moment, I understood. That single act of kindness, staying with a scared girl in a trauma bay, had rippled further than I ever imagined. It hadn't just saved Anna. It had built something in Nikolai too. The beginning of whatever this was between us, fractured, maybe, but real. And real was enough. We walked home after, hand in hand, the city blurring around us in amber streetlight and muffled sirens. He didn't speak until we reached the building. "She likes you," he said. I smiled. "She liked me before you did." "I'm just slower," he murmured. "But I get there." There were no declarations. No big speeches. But something shifted that night, not with words, but with ease. Like we'd stopped circling the edges of a fire and finally stepped inside it. Like we'd agreed, silently, to see what happened if we stopped being afraid. Some mornings I woke up before him, just to watch the way his face looked in sleep, less guarded, more human. There were still lines of worry etched deep around his brow. But in sleep, he looked young. Almost innocent. Like he hadn't been built by violence and loyalty and secrets. Once, he caught me watching. He didn't tease. He just reached for my hand under the covers and said, "Whatever you're thinking, I already agree." It made me laugh, the first real laugh since everything happened. And he kissed my knuckles like he was grateful to hear it. Like I was something he never expected to have, but wasn't planning to lose. One night, we were curled up on the couch, a blanket across both of us, watching a film neither of us really paid attention to. He turned to me slowly, brushing his fingers against the inside of my wrist. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. I blinked. "Like, tomorrow? Like, after all this?" It wasn't a proposal. Not officially. But it wasn't nothing either. It was a man built for war trying to imagine peace and daring to think I might be part of it. It was the softest version of "will you stay" he could offer. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I shifted closer, tucked myself under his arm, and let my head fall against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, slow. And it lulled me into sleep like a metronome made just for me. That night, I didn't dream of danger. In the days that followed, we fell into rhythm, a strange one, maybe, but ours. He still handled things I never asked about. I still pretended not to notice the second phone he kept in the drawer. But I also stopped flinching when he left the room to take a call, and he started sleeping with both arms wrapped around me instead of just one. The trust grew, not like a wildfire, but like ivy. Quiet. Stubborn. Impossible to stop. I found myself saying things I hadn't said in years, silly things, small things. Like, don't forget to eat, and you'll catch a cold if you go out in just that. He never rolled his eyes. Never brushed it off. He just nodded, and sometimes, just to ruin me, he'd say, "Thanks, document." It was reckless how much I loved that. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing between us ever did. But one evening, as I stood by his window watching the city breathe below us, he wrapped his arms around my waist and rested his chin on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time. And then I whispered it. Home. He stiffened slightly, the way you do when you hear something you weren't ready for, but desperately wanted. You called me that once, I said. Without saying it. In the way you made me feel. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, against my ear, he murmured, "You are." The morning light in Nikolai's penthouse was always soft, like the city tried to be gentler here. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting slow-moving lines across the polished wood. I woke alone in bed, still wrapped in his scent, cedar, leather, something impossible to name, but impossible to forget. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore, it was warm. The kind of silence that meant someone would be home soon. I padded barefoot into the living room, the oversized shirt of his I wore brushing my thighs. On the far wall, a monitor still glowed faintly. Normally, I wouldn't touch it, but something tugged at me. Curiosity, maybe. Or fate, disguised as habit. I crossed the room and tapped the screen. Footage flickered to life, not live feeds, but archives. I recognized the street corner first. Then the hospital entrance. Then me. Exhausted, blurry-eyed, pulling my coat tighter against a wind I barely noticed at the time. He had been watching even then. One clip bled into the next, me getting off the bus, unlocking my apartment door, leaning against the hallway wall after a long shift. Always unaware. Always seen. Always protected. Some were from a year ago. Others from 2. Some from that first month, before I ever knew his name. I couldn't look away. Each frame was a kind of quiet confession. Not just of surveillance, but of devotion. Of someone deciding I mattered long before I could offer him anything in return. It didn't feel invasive now, it felt like love, carefully folded into silence. When I heard the elevator chime behind me, I didn't move. I just let him walk in, let him see me watching everything he'd hidden for years. He froze in the doorway, a leather folder still in his hand, shoulders tense like he was bracing for rejection. But I turned to him slowly, my voice steady. I saw it. All of it. Nikolai didn't speak at first. His eyes, usually so composed, flickered with something close to fear. I crossed the room and stood in front of him, chest to chest, heartbeat to heartbeat. I don't want just protection anymore, I said. I want you. All of it. The words hung in the air, heavier than bullets, softer than breath. He looked at me like I was sunlight after too many years of storm. Then, slowly, he set the folder down on the counter, pulled something small from his coat pocket, and placed it on the table between us. A ring box. Midnight velvet. No words. "This is yours," he said quietly. "If you want it." No kneeling. No grand speech. Just truth, stripped of ceremony. My hand reached for it before I even realized. And when I opened it, my breath caught. It wasn't ornate. Simple band. A single stone. Elegant. Certain. Just like him. Just like us. I looked up at him and whispered the only word that mattered. Yes. His shoulders finally dropped, relief washing over his face like a man who had waited lifetimes for this answer. He stepped forward, gently took the box from my hand, and slid the ring onto my finger. Not as a promise of perfection, but of permanence. I kissed him then, slow, sure, aching with every step that had led us here. He kissed me back like he couldn't believe he was allowed to, and maybe neither of us fully believed it yet. But the truth was in every touch, every breath, every heartbeat that said, we made it. Against every rule, every risk, every shadow, we made it. Later that evening, we sat on the rooftop together. No bodyguards. No surveillance feeds. No urgent calls. Just 2 people wrapped in a blanket of city sounds and stars. He held my hand, thumb brushing over the ring like it was still sinking in. And I leaned against him, chest warm, heart steady. You scare me, I admitted, voice soft. Good, he replied. I scare everyone. I smiled. But not like that. No, no, I said. You scare me because you love me like I'm the only thing in your world that matters. And I don't know how to carry that. You don't have to, he said. I'll carry it for both of us. My eyes stung at that, not from sadness, but from the weight of finally feeling wanted. Not for what I could do. Not for what I could fix. But just for being exactly who I was. It felt like being chosen. Like being kept. The wind picked up, tugging at the edges of the blanket. I looked out across the skyline, this city that had tried to swallow me, and this man who had refused to let it. He watched me watch the world, content just to exist beside me. And in that moment, I understood exactly what I had. Not just a protector. Not just a lover. A home. He was the man in the shadows. Now he's the light I walk toward. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.